Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, our guest today is State Senator Bobby Singleton, Democrat from Greensboro. Also, the ALGOP Winter Dinner, who was hot and who was not. Also, Mike Hubbard didn't show to that dinner. He heard it was a fundraiser, just not for him. All this and much, much more coming up next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard facts. My name is Bill Britt. I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by the V team. Welcome all.
Hello. Good morning.
We have Jack sitting in with us again today. Always glad to have you, Jack.
Thank you.
A lot of things going on, but last week we were not able to get to the issue of the executive meeting of the ALGOP. They had their winter meeting last week, and that was kind of a challenging situation from what I heard. There were a lot of Republicans that were challenged on the ballot, whether they were real Republicans or not. Barron, you were there. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I was. There were a number of challenges that came from splinter groups within the Republican Party, and I think in order to fully understand these ballot challenges, you kind of got to understand the state of the Alabama Republican Party right now. So if you'll indulge me 10 seconds. Most people think, just 10. Most people think of the Republican Party as Tea Party versus mainstream. It's not. It's Tea Party, mainstream, and then the Hubbard-Riley faction of the Republican Party. And if you think of it in those terms, these ballot challenges make a lot more sense. Because what you saw were challenges coming out of different factions targeting one or the other, and then two factions sort of uniting in sort of defense of that, because they didn't want that third faction to sort of team up against them. And it was an interesting mess. There were probably 30 or so challenges. Only 4 or 5 people ended up getting thrown off the ballot. And I think they erred on the side of keeping people on the ballot in what would normally be close calls.
Well, I think one reason I think they probably did that because a lot of people started talking. I mean, I said I'm actually a member of the executive committee for the ALGOP, and I just sent a note out to many of the members of that committee saying, y'all, let's take 2 steps back, reflect on what happened to the Democrat Party in 1986 in Alabama. Do we really want to take the Alabama Republican Party down that road?
Well, I mean, a candidate like Tim Sprayberry, who's been a Republican all his adult life, who actually is the head of his county GOP party,
right, yeah.
And they tried to kick him off the ballot. I mean,
and Todd Greason,
Todd Greason,
16-year member of the Alabama legislature as a Republican, 4th-generation Republican family. And he took AEA money, so they tried to kick him off the ballot based on that. I filed a separate challenge against, I think it was 44 members of the Alabama legislature, including the governor and the lieutenant governor, who had in the past taken AEA money to show the hypocrisy. If you're going to, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And my challenge didn't go anywhere, and I got a lot of challenging calls on it, but I did it to show the point that we can't be a party of exclusivity all the time.
And I think that's kind of what you did and some others. That put a little wet blanket on the whole overall deal. And speaking of money, I mentioned to one of the lawyers that works with the senators, I said, there was a Supreme Court case called United Citizens where it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled saying you cannot tell a candidate or an individual they can't give X amount of dollars and they can't take money from a certain entity. That is unconstitutional. So why in the world does the Alabama Republican Party say you can't take money from X, Y, and Z?
Well, very interesting thing. I was up at the State House earlier this week, and I was talking to a couple of good, what I consider really fine Republicans. And both of them said the same thing to me, that the Democrats were controlled by the AEA. And now they feel like they're being controlled by the BCA, and that it's the BCA has taken on the same authority. And this is one of those things where everybody wants to control the flow of money so that they have the power. None of these special interests, whether it's AEA, BCA, or anybody, really should control the party. Is that?
No, I think you're exactly right. And this hypocrisy with, take the trial lawyers, for example. The Republicans spent 20 years in this state fighting the trial lawyers.
Right.
But now all of a sudden the trial lawyers have agreed, well, we're going to give 80% of our money to Republicans. And Del Marsh at the winter dinner, the Alabama Republican Party winter dinner, was sitting front and center next to Ginger Avery, the head of the Trial Lawyers Association. It's total hypocrisy. You want more hypocrisy? Todd Greason's challenge got carried over to a formal hearing because he took money from AEA. This is a guy who's been elected for 16 years as a Republican. Right. Tom Whatley gave $4,600 to Obama, almost $20,000 to Democrats in the last 5 or 6 years, no money to Republicans in the last 5 or 6 years, and his challenge doesn't get carried over. Who's the real Republican in that crew?
I mean, they're just arbitrarily picking this one and that. You cannot do that. That sets a dangerous precedent in the state of Alabama.
Speaking of, Speaker Hubbard was not at the winter meeting.
Well, let me say, you're right. He was not at the reception or the winter meeting where all the average Alabamans were. However, I understand, I found out from a real source, he did show up to the closed-door big donor meeting, people that give $50,000, anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, where they had a round table discussion. He showed up for that and left.
He had his hand out, or a bucket. Which was it?
Probably both.
But
yeah, he had a family obligation. I understand his not going to the dinner if that's really the case. I think his son had some event over in Auburn. But he also didn't attend the summer meeting. Didn't buy a table at either event. So who's supporting the party? Is he really supporting the party? Bob Riley bought one table for $1,500 to the winter dinner. He and his kids have made more money off the Republican Party than anybody in the history of the land, and that's all he could do. So who's really the loyalist?
We talk about money, really and truly. As you sit back and analyze all this, there's about 10 factions or 10 PACs in the state of Alabama that control the special interests.
Yeah. Well,
a lot of those people you named are in charge of them.
Well, it's sad, and it goes over into the supermajority. We've had bills this week, the Open Meeting Act. They wanted to push that through, and Hubbard has said he's against the Open Meeting Act passing. So it's held up because of one man who wants to keep this whole system closed down. I think the state should say enough is enough. Listen, we got to take a break. Coming up next, our guest is Bobby Singleton, Democrat from Greensboro. You're watching The V. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
The V is sponsored by Spot On Strategies Group. Here's what customers are saying about WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing.
Knocked the roof out in about a day and a half, and then they threw in our shed with the spare parts they had. It was just a wonderful blessing to the fire station.
The tax credit was a big bonus.
Hello, I'm Robert Wells, president of WeatherGuard. We are a family-owned business, and we will back our lifetime warranty for generations to come.
Come by our showroom on Alton Road in Birmingham. WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing, 533-7322.
In 1977, an 8-year-old boy picked up the game of golf from his father. The odds of that same boy then making it to the US and European Pro Golf Tours, 1 in 7 million. The odds of the Big Easy winning the US Open twice, 1 in 1.2 billion. The odds of him having a child diagnosed with autism, 1 in 88. Ernie Els encourages you to learn the signs of autism.
Welcome back to the V. Our guest today is Senator Bobby Singleton, Democrat from Greensboro. Senator, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited about being here with y'all today.
Well, it is our privilege. A lot of important issues have come up over the last few years. One of them that is troubling to a lot of folks is this idea that people now have to have IDs, state-approved IDs, to cast their ballots. You have some problems with that, don't you?
Yeah, I had some problems with that. You know, first of all, when the bill first came out, we thought that it was just another piece that was going to stop people from voting, and thought it was something that is going to be a hinder to the process. As we've gone down the line, and the governor at least did one good thing. He appointed a former state Secretary of State Jim Bennett to head up the process, and we were able to get in with them and try to at least to eliminate some of those roadblocks that we thought that would be there to keep people from having a free access to voting. Jim and his staff then started expanding the kind of IDs that was there. But the one thing particularly that basically disturbed me most is that in that bill, if a person fill out an application and give some false information, they will be committing a Class C felony in the event of that information. And when you look at the legislation basically stated what the information on the application would be: your hair color, your eyes, your weight. And you know, if you get out there and you say that, a lot of females don't like to say what their real weight is. Even men today don't. And if we say, you know, if I say I'm 5'6" and I'm 5'8", then I'm actually committing a felony on that application. So I introduced a bill to reduce that from a Class C felony down to a Class A misdemeanor that got passed out of the House Judiciary last week. And then we brought it to the floor. Brought it to the floor last week, and now it's down to the House. So hopefully we can get it on the House committee and get that done, and that'll help kind of soften the blow, because people were looking at that felony as a hinder of going to vote and said, well, if I'm got to go vote now and I'm going to be committing a felony just by giving some information, then I don't want to go vote.
This has been a national push, primarily by the Republican Party. I know the Democratic Party has said this is designed to disallow people their voting rights.
Yes.
But you feel that with this new exception, you feel okay with this?
Well, I feel okay with the exception, because what you got to do is, as you know, and you're around the process, sometimes when you got a piece of legislation and you know it's going to pass anywhere or it's going to be against you, you at least try to put amendments on it or something to try to soften the blows, even though you're going to have to deal with it. We've been dealing with this for the last 2 years, and we knew that the IDs were coming. And because of the voting rights, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act had been stricken down by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now the pre-clearance process at the Justice Department is no longer there. So what you have to do is at least try to do something at the state level to soften the blow, to make sure that people will have that free and access to the right to vote.
During the redistricting process and before pre-clearance was struck down, one of our senators, state senators, a female, said in her testimony that the Republican supermajority in the Senate had problems with women, with African Americans, and with poor folks. She said a little bit stronger than that. One of the recent bills that has come up is drug testing for welfare or TANF recipients. Is this a strike back against the poor and the underprivileged folks, or is this just good politics or good policy?
Well, I think this is a strike back. I think, you know, the concept and the mindset of the Republicans, I think they're just trying to out-conservative the Tea Partyers. It seems like there's a fight between Republicans and Tea Partyers, and Tea Party's members are saying that they're not strong enough and striking the whip on us enough. So I think that they're just trying to show them that, you know, we'll go after people. But this bill in particular reaches out to poor mothers who are just trying to get by with their children. And what the bill says is that if you have committed a crime or been convicted of a drug crime in the last 5 years, then that prompts reasonable suspicion. And under reasonable suspicion, we know that under the law that reasonable suspicion is a fact, apparent fact, that leave an experienced officer to believe that a crime has been committed or about to be committed.
Right.
My question to him is, who's going to be this person who's experienced to say, without being subjective, on some mother if they don't like them, if they come to DHR? Our DHR workers are not trained to look and see who's using drugs and who's not using drugs.
Isn't it true that this law has been in effect in other states and has not had any benefits whatsoever?
Let's look at the state of Florida. In 2011, when this bill came in Florida, and in 2012, the Florida Supreme Court struck it down simply because they had a process by which they were testing everybody. They used millions of dollars in the state of Florida on testing because the state had to pay for those tests, same as it would be here in Alabama. They had 3 cases, not 3%, but 3 cases to where a person showed up with drugs in their system. And 2 of those cases were people who had taken some over-the-counter drugs that triggered some kind of system in their system.
Do you think this will pass? It's got some problems, doesn't it?
It has some problems. It probably will pass. With this supermajority, it's election year, it probably will pass.
But this is bad policy and good politics. Is that what we're seeing here?
Exactly, it is. Bad policy, good politics. You know, and the thing about it is that, and I keep saying that, if we're going to do it, let's be equitable. Let's look at everybody who's out there. You're trying to say that these mothers who don't want to go to work, you assume that everybody who receive public assistance is lazy, don't want to go to work, and they don't want to do anything. This is my taxpayer dollars taking care of them. The situation is not the same for everybody, you know?
No, I mean, Walmart has lots of employees that receive food stamps and public assistance because Walmart doesn't pay them a living wage. I mean, this is a fact that's been nationally proved. We got about 30 seconds. Anything else on your mind about this session?
Well, you know, as you talk about workers, I also want to talk about those workers who go and work at Hyundai, where we, the state of Alabama, give our incentive money. And they are working alongside other people who are full-time. And while the governor would not expand Medicaid, these are some of the same people who need that because they don't receive any medical care. And they work in the plant right beside people who are making $20 and $30 an hour, and they're making less than half of that.
We thank you for your time. Our guest today has been Senator Bobby Singleton from Greensboro. You're watching The V. We'll be right back.
The V is sponsored by Ginger Barbie, attorney at law. And MediaWorks Communications, video production services for all your video production needs. Here's what customers are saying about WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing.
Knocked the roof out in about a day and a half, and then they threw in our shed with the spare parts they had. It was just a wonderful blessing to the fire station.
The tax credit was a big bonus.
Hello, I'm Robert Wells, president of WeatherGuard. We are a family-owned business, and we will back our lifetime warranty for generations to come.
Come by our showroom on Alton Road in Birmingham. WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing, 533-7322.
Welcome back to The V, the voice of Alabama politics. Bobby Singleton was our guest. He had a lot of interesting things to say. I think one thing that's very interesting, and it's gonna be a big issue, is this drug testing for TANF dollars, or as we commonly call it, welfare. I know, Barron, you have some issues with that, don't you?
Well, I mean, I don't care if they drug test welfare recipients or not. If they're going to do that, though, like I said a couple of weeks ago, let's drug test other interested parties, registered lobbyists, staffers at the State House, legislators. Let's not just pick and choose which group are sucking off the public dime here that we want to drug test. Let's get everybody.
Well, in addition, I mean, one day this week at the Senate, I mean, it tied up the whole day, and basically then the pro tem Delmar said, well, let's just adjourn, because that's all they did the very first day. I think it was Tuesday, the first day of the legislature. They burned up the whole day on that bill.
But Senator Singleton raised a good point, though, which is that this legislation is designed to pander to a belief or this notion that folks who receive these benefits are lazy and they don't want to work, and they're sitting at home on their front porches. And that's
why I want to test the legislators, the lobbyists, and the staffers, because I have the same belief about them.
Easy now, not everybody.
Well, I brought that up in the elevator at the State House the other day with about 6 or 7 legislators in there. They all cracked up, but one of them turned his head to the wall. Maybe he was on his cell phone or something.
But, you know, back to the whole deal, and we can move. We've discussed this many times, but they say if you've ever had a prior conviction, those are the ones that are drug tested.
What about this voter ID thing? That's an interesting thing.
Well, if you love to steal elections, you'll love Bobby Singleton, because the whole voter ID thing is, I got to show my ID to get a case of beer. I got to show my ID to get on an airplane. The most sacred, solemn obligation is selecting who's going to represent us in the White House, in Congress, in the State House. And my God, if you can't show an ID for that, if you can't get off your butt and go down and get an ID that will be provided to you for free in order to go vote, you're too lazy to vote.
Well, I mean, you know, we have dilly-dallied around with this.
I completely disagree with that, Barron.
I mean, we have dilly-dallied around with this since 1994 elections. If y'all recall, when there was Chief Justice Sonny Hornsby and then became Justice Perry Hooper. And so from that day forward in the 1995 legislative process, we've been trying to pass some type of voter ID. And we're one of few states that don't have it. I mean, I'm not care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Tea Party, whatever. We should have to have some type of identification to vote.
I want to know this, though. Here's what I want to know. Everybody talks about this rampant vote stealing and all this kind of stuff and voter fraud. How many cases of voter fraud have been prosecuted in the state of Alabama in the last 10 years?
We don't know, because we don't require voter ID. If we had voter ID, we might be able to tell who the fraudulent actors are. That's the point. We want to prevent the fraud. Right now it's an unknown quantity, because anybody can show up and claim to be me.
So let's pass a law to solve a problem that we don't know if it's a problem because we can't quantify it.
Well, but wait a minute. Let me tell you something. I grew up in the Black Belt. There's plenty of that's where a tremendous amount of fraud's going on.
How do we know? How many cases
1994 election. There was the Treasurer's Office, too. I mean, none of y'all were here. Unfortunately, I'm an old person, I guess, by now. But, you know, that was when I moved back, and there was a tremendous amount of vote fraud. They were manufacturing ballots in the bottom of the basement. I think it was in Greene County. We've had it in Bullitt County. We've had it in Macon. We've had it all
Well, but that's
state.
always been the case. You know, I don't care who casts the votes, just who counts them.
Well, that's the people come up
but as to Charlana's point, that if you can't prove it's a problem, you can't pass a law, that's garbage. I mean, we have lots of laws that we can't prove it's a problem, but we suspect that somebody's violating a pretty solemn obligation. We make it very user-friendly and easy to go out and solve. Go do it. You know, you've got 4 years before the next election to go buy someplace and pick up a voter ID. How hard is that?
Let's move
on.
Let's
think about the folks who can't find their birth certificates, who can't find their Social Security cards. Right now, Barron, would you be able to register to vote? And
yes, I have a passport and a driver's license.
Anyway, we're going to move on to the next subject.
Don't get too aggravated with that.
You just can't get one of those star IDs to board domestic flights come December.
I got to take a trip to Indiana.
All right. Article 5, constitutional conventions. We hear our friends all the time saying that the Constitution was divinely inspired and it's sacrosanct. But now we've got Senator Pittman and Senator Orr and Justice Roy Moore all saying they want to call for an Article 5 constitutional convention to change our sacrosanct, godly inspired Constitution. How does that work out?
Lord, if we can't get voter ID, what about a Constitution?
It doesn't work out well, and part of the problem is there are 17 states that recognize same-sex unions, and you have to have 34 states to call for a constitutional convention under Article 5. And so you already have a number of states, which makes it mathematically impossible for you to do the very thing that you're asking for an Article 5 convention to do.
And I will say, and y'all may have seen this, but Representative John Lewis from Georgia is doing a whole campaign swing around the entire southeast region to campaign for same-sex marriage.
Yeah, and the thing that bothers me really is this thing about the balancing the budget. You know, they want to have an Article 5 constitutional thing to balance the budget. If the United States government balanced its budget, the first place they would cut is on what they send to states. And if they cut what Alabama gets from the federal government, we would be the poorest third world country in the northern hemisphere.
That is for sure.
Well, and look, let's look at the last time there was this big hullabaloo about calling for an Article 5 convention. It was back in the 1980s, and it was to call for a balanced budget. The whole point of that was to use the threat of an Article 5 convention to whip Congress into action. I don't think there is the same impetus here because there's no movement in Congress to legislate about either a balanced budget or same-sex marriage.
It's blatant pandering, and it's the same thing that frustrates me about basically everything Senator Singleton said when he got here. He's a great guy. He's certainly a nice guy, but he's blatantly pandering to his base in order to gin up some sort of excitement for the elections coming up.
We could spend a whole show about
and that's what this Article
pandering to
5 stuff
bases.
is. It's a mathematical impossibility. What 6 blue states are you going to go and get on board to pass just a host of right-wing legislation and enshrine it into our Constitution? It's not going to happen. But we can pander, just like Senator Singleton knows he's not going to stop voter ID, but he can pander. And that's that's a huge problem with what's going on.
And I'm for balancing the budget. I wish we could get it balanced, but we can't do it for a constitutional deal. It's just going to be nuts. Another thing here, this week we saw this Open Meetings Act has been stalled. Cam Ward has done everything he can do to get that thing moving forward, and he's got resistance in the House.
No.
And that's usually, then the funny thing, that's usually the other way around.
I know.
Usually the House everything flies through like you're on a saucer. And it's the gridlock logjam. Normally it happens in the Senate where you get the logjam.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I've seen a lot of that where things are starting in the Senate this time, and I'm not sure what the Speaker and them, why they don't want things moving in the House.
Well, that certainly is an interesting one to me, because you would think everybody would be in favor of Open Meetings Act.
Transparency?
Transparency. We got about one more minute. Let's talk a little bit about transparency. You've got some thoughts.
We don't have transparency when it comes to some of the campaign finance that's happening in this election cycle. Because of this mushrooming of 501c4s, the 527s, I was one that used to follow the PAC-to-PAC transfers, and you could. I mean, folks would sit down and you could see how the money was moving, so you knew who was putting money in at the front end and where it was coming out at the back end when it got to the campaigns. You can't do that now. You can study the campaign finance reports all you want, and it's not going to show what's happening in the 501c4s and the 527s.
Yeah, so they have just, like you said, it's mushroom. There's the PACs, but then you've got all these 501c3s.
I'll say it, I've been saying it for 3 years. The Republican supermajority never intended to run a single election with PAC-to-PAC bans.
Well, we got to get out of here. You've been watching The V. You can catch us every day at alreporter.com or on Sundays at 11 o'clock in Birmingham on ABC 3340 or in Montgomery at ABC 32. Thanks for watching. We're The V.